For more than 10 months now, Ukraine has been fending off Russia's invasion of its territory. Rajan Menon is director of the Grand Strategy Program at the think tank Defense Priorities and a non-resident scholar in the Russia and Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's been tracking the conflict closely, and he joins us now from Ukraine's capital city in Kyiv. And I want to thank you very much for taking time away from whatever it is you're normally doing right now, Mr. Menon, to join us. And to that end, let's ask our control room to put a map up of Ukraine at the moment, because this will show a bit of your journey. There's Kyiv right in the middle of Ukraine, Lviv in the west, the two controversial regions in the east, which Russia has illegally tried to annex, Kherson, which we've heard so much about on the Black Sea on the south, and Kharkiv as well, just east of where you are right now. Now, normally you live on the northeastern part of the United States. How difficult was it for you to get into Kyiv?
Well, the first thing to understand, Steve, is that the airspace in Ukraine is closed to commercial aircraft. So it's open only to military aircraft, VIPs, and so on, which means that you fly into Warsaw, and then you drive to Lviv, the city you just mentioned in western Ukraine. That's about a 6-hour drive, depending on conditions related to border crossings. You then have to stop there because there is a curfew that kicks in about 10 o'clock at night. No cars are allowed on the street. You resume your journey from Lviv to the capital, which is Kyiv. That's about another 7 hours. So we're talking, give or take, 14 hours, but it could be much longer depending on what the conditions are like at the border, especially going back out to Poland. There's a lot of cigarettes smuggling. Cigarettes are much cheaper in Ukraine than in Poland, and so trucks are stopped and inspected. I once saw a line of trucks headed west, standing at the border, that was about 20 miles long. So Ukraine is a big country, and in wartime, you've got to take your time getting there.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question. I trust and I hope that you didn't see anything too militarily scary on the way to the capital?
Not on the way to the capital. As you get closer to the capital, there are military checkpoints. An American or Canadian passport will do wonders, and you're generally waved through. Kyiv itself, Steve, is very well protected. Today, we had an air alert. There were actually more alerts when I was here in August, and there's been for the past several days an eerie lull. People have been wondering when the next wave would be. So today, the Russians fired 80 rockets and did 80 rockets and airstrikes at Ukraine. None of them got through to Kyiv, but we were herded into the, shall we say, the bunker of this hotel for the longest time I've spent in it. So much so that I ultimately decided to leave because I had an appointment. So there was a very serious red alert in Kyiv, but they hit a number of other cities, which I'll be glad to mention later if you'd like.
Well, indeed. Why don't you pick up the story there? I know you have been to other cities in Ukraine. Have any of them been hit during your time there?
Yeah. Yes, I have been to Kryvyi Rih, which is in the south, which happens to be the home of the president, Vladimir Zelensky. It's a Russian-speaking industrial city. It was hit today. It was hit when I was here last time. I was in Nikopol on the Dnieper River, across the river from the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which you may have heard of. It's the largest one in Europe. That was hit today. I was in Odessa, where I went from Kherson. It's to the east of Kherson. It's a big port on the Black Sea. And I told one of your producers earlier, Preeti, that it looked like the war had never touched Odessa. But lo and behold, today they hit it, and Odessa is without water. So much for the tranquility of Odessa. And there have been other cities that have been hit as well. So today was a big day, and they did it because there was an attack on a Russian airbase in the interior of Russia, and the Russians believe that the Ukrainians did it, and this was payback. But the Russians don't need any excuse to strike Ukraine. They've been doing it with high intensity for quite a while now.
Indeed. How long have you been in the country, all told, so far?
This, I believe, is my 8th day in Ukraine, about the same time I spent last time.
Okay, so
I have
8 days.
Job.
Yeah, 8 days is certainly long enough to get a sense about how people are coping with what clearly has been crazy, disruptive military adventurism over the last 10 months. How's it going?
Yes. You would think that all of this bombing and being under the constant pressure of being attacked would sap the willpower of people. But I'll just give you a human interest story. When I got out of the hotel today to go to my meeting in a restaurant, against the advice I will add of the hotel staff, I got into an Uber and I said to the person, "Well, it's good to see you out and about. Aren't you worried about the air raids?" And he said to me in Russian, "Well, what will happen will happen. I have to do my job." And that is important to realize because people cannot put their lives on hold and be in a state of constant stress for months on end. They have to learn to function. And the way they do it is to go about their jobs as best they can, live their lives as best they can. And if anything, the intensity of the Russian attacks has increased Ukrainian willpower. Somebody told me the other day the donations to the Ukrainian army have skyrocketed even further after the attacks became as intensive as they have.
But do you see military-age men at all leading sort of normal lives, or is everybody off fighting?
Well, there are lots of military-age men you see around, but they may have deferments for one reason or the other. But the Ukrainian army has had no difficulty eliciting volunteers. If anything, so many people are volunteering that they have to turn people back because they don't have the basic skills that people need. So I don't think there's a shortage of people willing to fight and die. That is not a problem. The bigger problem, as I see it, if I may just briefly say so, is the havoc that the Russian attacks have played with the Ukrainian economy, because what they're trying to do is to take down the electrical grid. And think of the electrical grid as the central nervous system of our body. Without it, plumbing, heating, transportation, the railway system, nothing can work. And so that is the name of the game for the Russians at the moment. And that is going to be very, very difficult to deal with in the winter. So, for example, think of a city like Kiev, which has 3 million people. The electricity goes off, so do water pumping stations. And you can make heat and light, but you can't make water. And if you run out of water, the sewage backs up, people cannot wash themselves with the dishes. You have a public health crisis in the making. And that is why the mayor of Kiev, Mr. Klitschko, said not long ago that it may well be that they will have to think about evacuating big cities like Kiev. And that would be a humanitarian catastrophe.
Let me get your sense of this. We know that people in Ukraine speak both Ukrainian and Russian. And I wonder whether you have seen any examples of, for example, people who are Russian speakers being discriminated against because of that, or conversely, maybe in the eastern part of the country, you see people who speak Ukrainian and the Russian-speaking people give them a hard time. How much of that do you see?
Well, this is a very good question. So one of the things I try to address when I speak to American audiences, or in this case, Canadian audiences, is there is at one level an east-west difference in Ukraine, because when you go east beyond the Dnieper River into the area called the Donbass, highly industrialized, kind of Sovietized area, there is a very large proportion of ethnic Russians and or Ukrainians whose language is Russian. But one has to understand that those differences have been really blurred now, and there is a Ukrainian nationalism that transcends linguistic and ethnic differences. So to give you a clear example, I was in Kherson. Pretty much every one of the soldiers I spoke to were Russian speakers. And believe me, there was no love lost between them and Mr. Putin. So I think the idea that somehow Russian speakers or ethnic Russians in Ukraine are necessarily well disposed toward Russia and have some support for this war is wrong. Another thing to bear in mind, it is the East and the South, the so-called Russophone part of Ukraine, if you will, that has suffered the most. The poster child, if you will, for this is Mariupol, the city of Mariupol in the east on the Sea of Azov. It is the latter-day Guernica, and I speak of the Spanish city that was destroyed by air attack in the 1930s, and there was a famous painting, as you know, done by Picasso of that.
Yes, indeed. Talk to me about burden sharing. I read your piece that you wrote in which you really laid it out. I know, for example, the Canadian government thinks it's doing a great job contributing to the efforts of the Ukrainian government. But then, as you point out, pretty much 80% of everything over there is being done by the Americans. How much burden sharing is actually happening?
So 80% of the armaments are in dollar value American armaments. And that is not surprising because the United States has the largest arsenal in the world. And so if Ukraine needs a lot of weaponry, it's not surprising the U.S. would be the main provider. What I find, though, not as congenial as an American, shall I say, is if you look at the economic numbers, there too, the overwhelming majority, but not quite 80%, is American assistance. And so I would like to see a division of labor where the United States provides the bulk of economic military aid, but the Europeans step up and give more. If you look at it as a percentage of GDP, for example, Germany, the richest country in Europe, ranks way below the United States and way below a number of European countries, and including Canada, less than Canada as well. So surely a country like Germany can give more. And I say this because as things get difficult economically in Europe, they already are. In the US, I think they're going to get worse. There will be a discussion about keeping Ukraine funded. Its needs are vast, and there will be a question about who gives what, when, where, and how.
The Prime Minister of Finland recently said that Europe is, quote, not strong enough to stand up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine without American support. Do you agree with that?
Well, it isn't now because it doesn't have the material wherewithal, that is the military oomph, if you will. And to acquire that, you need investment in defense budgets and military technologies. My own view has been that the dependence of Europe on the United States made perfect sense for much of the Cold War. But if you look at the GDP of the European Union combined, it's about the size of the United States. And as you well know, Europe has some of the most developed and technologically advanced economies in the world. So if they cannot do without the United States, it is not for want of means, it is for want of will. So I personally would like to see a Europe that does much more for its own defense, because I see no reason why it cannot do so. As a European, I wouldn't want to be utterly dependent on the United States to the degree that Europe is in. Now, that is a choice for Europeans to make, but as an American, I would like to see a different kind of division of labor when it comes to defense, with Europe being more defense autonomous, if you will. Now, that's not a view that every American holds, but it is the view that I happen to hold.
Mm-hmm. Now, does the average Ukrainian have a good sense about which countries have contributed what to their efforts?
I think there's an enormous gratitude toward all countries. And when I say some countries have contributed less, I don't mean to knock any country, because Ukrainians will tell you that aid from the West is highly appreciated and highly important. But I think they have a sense that this is largely speaking on the military front, economic front, and political front, for better or for worse, whether you agree or not, an American show. That is to say, they take their cues largely from the United States. They view Canada, Poland, and the three Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and Britain, as probably their strongest allies in the Euro-Atlantic alliance.
And just finally, again, in your conversations with the average Ukrainian person, how confident are they that they will, at the end of the day, prevail?
I asked this question to about 25 people since I've been here, and I get two responses. The harder the Russians hit us, the higher our morale will become, and we will win. It may take time, but we're prepared to go all the way to the end. And so I don't see any flagging of morale. If anything, I would say, since I was back here in August, morale is stronger among the general population and among the soldiers that I've fought with, and they have undergone the soldiers have undergone enormous difficulties.
Rajan Menon from Defense Priorities, it's awfully good of you to spare some time for us during your trip to Ukraine. And thank you for your sense of what's happening there on the ground these days. We're grateful.
Thank you, Steve. Be well.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.